Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey David, how you doing today?
Good, Bruce. I got my second dose of vaccine plotted out
Yeah,
for tomorrow. Looks like
tomorrow.
yeah, I got to go to Onaway to get, I got the AstraZeneca. I'm going to stick with that. And to get it, I need to go to Onaway. So anyway,
Wowza.
um,
Okay.
I don't know what that's all about, but I'm willing to go there. Alrighty, so I'm looking forward to being fully vaccinated as you are,
I
and
say, hopefully you're on a way to full immunity here.
thank you, Gene.
I reached my 2 weeks, 2 weeks after my second dose here,
Uh-huh.
over the weekend. So
Yeah, great
it's a
stuff.
bit of a milestone to finally get to that point. So, but AstraZeneca will be different, but the mRNA ones are notorious for having a bit of a kick on the second dose because your body is now trained to fight. So my second dose the day after was rough.
Ah, yeah, well,
I had
fine
I had
now.
a real tough day on the Saturday after my shot, but
You're good now.
yeah, I was
That
good
was
the
a
next
while
day. I
ago,
was good on the Sunday. Yeah, it was just a one day sort of real rough go of it.
and now you got a chance to win $1 million, Bruce.
At least they opened it up to everyone, so
Yeah.
the compliant should have a shot at that lottery just as much as anybody else.
Yes. Oh, definitely. All right. Let's not get into vaccine politics. All right. We are going to get into something which is not quite so controversial, but Ken Holland, Bruce, he's been the GM 2 years now. We're going to look at his full body of work. And the question we're going to try to answer today is, has he moved the needle? Has he moved the needle forward or back? Forward or back? And I think it's fair to say, like, Peter Chiarelli, in our view at least, in his first year as GM, had moved the needle forward. Um, After the 2016-17 playoffs, we were definitely, and he had moved the needle forward camp. I think both of us, it's fair to say. You can object to that if you want, but that's definitely where I was. And then he proceeded to move the needle back, back, back until he got fired. Ken Holland, where is he at? So we're gonna dig into this. I don't know if either of us has a final conclusion, even in our heads right now, whether he's moved it back or forward. Bruce, let's start with where do you think he's moved the needle? Just we'll trade examples. Give an example where you think he moved the needle forward, and then we'll move on to where you think he moved it back. What would be your suggestion for moving a needle forward? Where did he succeed?
Number one on my personal list of Ken Holland's achievements was the way he handled the Jesse Puljujärvi situation.
I was about to
Uh,
say the same thing.
how
Yeah.
he didn't panic, I mean, there was every opportunity to trade the guy, try and recoup a draft pick or somebody else's failing prospect. Um, and I mean, Puljujärvi's stock was so low, I think you'd find it in the penny stocks page. And he just let him do what he needed to do, which is spend a year back home in Finland getting his stuff together, his confidence back, his love of the game back, which is I think fundamental to this particular player in person, and uh, getting a deal done, and not just a deal done, but a 2 year deal done. Like I was thinking at best it's going to be 1 year. If he plays well, they're going to have to pay him right away. Well, we got one more year, Jesse Puljujärvi, at the very reasonable price of $1.15 million. That's a big time value contract for one more year. So between just salvaging the player at all and also getting him signed to his second year at such a decent price, that's a big win for Ken Holland in my estimation.
Yeah, I think it's a home run. It might even be close to the Grand Slam home run. But it's definitely a home run. If Puljujärvi keeps progressing, could be a Grand Slam. And that second year is a real big part of it, isn't it? I think
Oh,
Puljujärvi might have had the value of a second round pick if they had traded him. They couldn't have got a first, I don't believe. They're unlikely to get a first pick if they
right.
had traded him.
No, okay.
Probably a second, maybe even a third. Like there was just such a small market out there for the player, and someone else would have feasted on that. It's interesting. He wasn't Holland's pick. He wasn't wedded to this player,
Hmm.
but this is one where his vast experience. I think sometimes it's people denigrate him for being long in the tooth, maybe not up on the modern GMing, salary cap machinations, and analytics. This is one where his vast experience, I think, really did pay off. So when we attack him, when he's criticized for those other things, it's balanced off in some ways now and then. This is one such occasion where it was balanced off. And again, 2 years. Like, what would they be if they had to sign him now? They'd be looking at paying him a bit more, I think, than what is he getting in that second year? Let me just have a look.
Well, his AAV is 1.15. I think it is probably asymmetric. So his platform season will be closer to 1.5. But
I believe
so
that's
what?
correct.
That's still very reasonable.
Really good deal for the Oilers on a second contract. Of course, the player had a lot to prove, but again, 2 years. That gets into Grand Slammy territory. But until he really pans out as a player, it's hard to bump it up there. I'll go with my. I would have picked Puljujärvi as the best move he's made. I'm going to go with the second best move. Is Mike Smith. I think that the year that Mike Smith had was put that contract into him and the Puljujärvi deal, but even more so with Smith is probably one of the top bargain contracts in the NHL this past season. What was it, $1.5 million? And he just had a year that, if you had paid your goalie $6 million to have a season like that, you wouldn't be complaining. And they paid him $1.5 million. So very few people would have stuck with Mike Smith that after that season, and even bringing him in the first year. Like the first year, I think was kind of a wash. Like it was okay. It kind of worked out. He got them into the playoffs. He got them into second place in the division. If the season had ended, they would have been in the playoffs. Mike Smith was a big part of that. He played very well for large stretches of the year. He had one bad patch,
Sure did.
but very bad patch.
Yeah.
But even then, it was okay-ish the first year, I would suggest. Second year, I'm going to say the second year is a Grand Slam home run in terms of the contract with Mike Smith. That's just a great move. So,
Yeah, sticking with him and bringing him back was, sort of going against the current, to say the least. A lot of people here in Edmonton were hoping they'd seen the last of Smith after 2019-20, when honestly he was key to the Oilers having a hot start out of the gate, and he was key to their recovery in the new year after he had been key to their terrible slump in December. But Kassian got hurt on New Year's Eve, and Smith sort of took the net for a while, and he took over the net. He went a long while without losing a game, and the Oilers surged into playoff position. And then, of course, all that came undone with a single half game, not even 26 minutes and 32 seconds, if I recall, against Chicago in game one, where he allowed 5 goals and got pulled from the net, never to return. And you and I and many others thought that was the end of his time here. But Holland, certainly he deserves credit. One wonders, was Smith plan B, plan C, plan D, and it certainly all fell together and it happened to work out. But there was talk he was after Matt Murray. There was very loud talk that he was after Jacob Markstrom and offering big term in dollars for Markstrom. And when all those dominoes fell, and there was a few other goalies that all signed on what amounted to July 1st, October 9th it was, but the first day of free agency, to circle back and get Mike Smith at a discount, which he chopped 500 grand off of his base salary, and he really chopped down his bonuses, so that even with bonuses paid this year, Smith only made $1.7 million, and the Oilers saved about $1 million on their goaltending budget compared to the year before. So you know, I think there was some luck involved. I mean, nobody foresaw, obviously, Mike Smith having that sort of year. But it's funny, David. I looked at in the post I wrote about him a little while back. I looked at the goalies in the Canadian division, and I think there's 11 that played 20 or more games, and the three cheapest ones by far were Mike Smith, Jack Campbell, and Thatcher Demko. And you could almost make a case they were the three best goalies in the regular season in Canada. Certainly Campbell and Smith ranked way up there in terms of performance. And the fact that every other goalie on the list, 8 other goalies, all made north of $4.3 million, that's the cost of doing business for a good goalie. So Oilers got a good goalie for a very reasonable price.
Let's rotate. Let's go to one of the moving the needle back, Bruce. What would be top of your list for moving the needle back?
Boy, top of the list. I got a few items on the list, but I think the mistake on Kyle Turris has to rank pretty high on that list. And Turris was he was bought out by Nashville on October the 7th. Very late in the game. They must have had a second free agent window open because somebody went to arbitration or something. I'm not familiar with the guts of the deal. All I know is it wasn't until October 7th that he was bought out. And on the morning of October 9th, the Oilers signed the guy to a 2-year deal. In this case, the second year is not a good thing because he's still around after a total failure of a first season. And this after a total failure in Nashville, where 2 years into a 6 times $6 million contract, they seen enough and they said, we got to get this guy out of here. We're gonna pay him $2 million a year for the next 8 years, not to play for us. And I'm just not sure that there was enough time in between there that for the Oilers to say, oh, he's on the market now, or maybe they had some advance warning or whatever. But whatever their scouting department was looking at in their video department, I'm just not sure what they saw because they had him slotted in to be the 3C. And the only way that might possibly have worked is if he still had so much offense in his game that aligned with him and Tyler Ennis and Jesse Puljujärvi could maybe not outscore, but at least sort of keep up with their defensive mistakes. But no, he couldn't score, nor could he defend. He really brought very little to the table. And it's not just the cost of the contract, but it's the opportunity cost. Like they figured they were solved at 3C, and that wound up being an issue for the team fairly deep into the season before they worked that one out.
And it was exacerbated when Gaetan Haas came down with COVID and was set back maybe for the whole season. Like he might have had, like he started out strong when he came back in his first, and then he kind of like had a really bad month that kind of doomed him with the Oilers Gaetan Haas. And I wonder if that was like lingering, not feeling well. We don't know that for sure. I'm just speculating. But the Turris thing is, it wasn't just, I don't mind when the Oilers make a bet, $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 on a player. The more of those bets you're willing to make in some ways, it's great because you're just putting more bullets to shoot. And if they misfire, it doesn't hurt you because you can send those players to the minors. So, spending like, let's just, Patrick Russell obviously didn't work out, and Granlund and Thomas Yurcho, but it doesn't really hurt your team necessarily. There is an opportunity cost of that roster spot. But, it's made up. You bring in Gaetan Haas or Tyler Ennis or Cahoon or, some of the players, Nygaard, have been a little bit more promising. Riley Sheahan, they signed Lagesson and Jones for cheap deals like that. So these cheap deals don't bother me. Turris was a cut above that, though.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He's $1.65 million per year.
Yep.
And anytime you're spending more than that minimum amount, you need to be sure because it becomes significant opportunity cost when dollars are scarce, cap dollars are scarce. He was Bruce. He was the worst player on the Oilers this year. And it was heartbreaking because this is a team, to me, You have a chance with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and Mike Smith playing well and Darnell Nurse stepping up. You had a chance to do something in the playoffs. And blowing it, based on terrible pro scouting advice, I think. I think they should get rid of the person who recommended Turris to them. They should fire that person. It was a major mistake. Third line center is a major position on a team.
Sure is.
It's not. It's like a top line. It's, Rich Winter's theory is it's 11. I think it's 11 players.
7-4-1.
7-4-1. Whatever that. Yeah, that's 12, I guess. 11 position players, and third line center is one of them. And they just 100%. Absolutely blew it. They got it wrong, and I think it was foreseeable. I wasn't scouting Turris. I wasn't looking, so I couldn't foresee it necessarily. I didn't know what we're getting in Turris. I watched the Oilers. I don't have time to do that kind of analysis on every other team. They have people. That is their job to get that right. That's the only job they have, and they blew it. And if it was the only mistake that they ever made, just Kyle Turris, I wouldn't say this. But because we're going to go through a list of other mistakes of pro scouting, I think, that are equally bad. Someone's screwing up in pro scouting again and again and again under Ken Holland, and it's not looking good on Ken Holland at this point. And so if it's the same person each time, they've got to solve this issue, Bruce. Or I don't have confidence in this management team going forward.
It's been too long. It's way more than the Ken Holland era that we've been griping about pro scouting. I mean, it's been all the time that I've been with the Cult of Hockey, and back before that. And let's bring back the guy who identified Steve Staios for a 3-year contract in 2001 or whenever the heck that was. That's the kind of signing that the Oilers need to be making, and they seem to just get recommendations of guys, and they come in and they're underwhelming or less.
Oh God,
Kyle Turris.
He was the new Eric Belanger. It's like Mark Fane, Benoit Pouliot, Jared Smithson. It's just Curtis Foster. It's just endless. Ben Eager. Players who come in here who can't perform, who don't play well. And there's been a few exceptions to that rule. David Perron was a good pickup.
Yeah, he was actually a target in a trade, and that was an actual trade that worked out, at least in the short term, until they traded him for another draft pick, and then they traded that pick and wound up with nothing. But
so maybe I'm a little bit harsh here because I have this, subconsciously I'm blaming the new pro scouts for all the mistakes of all the previous pro scouts that we've seen in the last decade. That's probably part of what's going on here. Nonetheless, the trend is continuing to some extent, and it's a little bit alarming because good teams that win the Stanley Cup, they don't tend to make these kind of mistakes with their third line center position. They get the right guy, or they develop the right guy. And you could say, well, Ken Holland hasn't had time to develop the right guy. That might be a fair comment. But the Turris thing. All right, my bad thing will be, I'm going to just group two moves, Bruce, in together. Markstrom and OEL, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, the pursuit of both these players. And I think we can say with certainty, based on the amount of reporting that's gone on, that Markstrom was offered a 7-year deal for at least $5 million, probably plus, from the Oilers, maybe plus from the Oilers, and he turned it down for the Calgary deal. Ekman-Larsson's a little harder to comment on because
we don't know.
It was heavily reported that the Oilers were interested and were making inquiries, but Ken Holland isn't doing his job if he's not inquiring about every player and seeing what the price is. Because for all we know, we take Ekman-Larsson and they take James Neal. For all we know, that was the deal. We don't know what the deal was, right? Yeah. It could have been two teams with contracts that they thought had negative value going forward. The OEL thing's a little dicier because of that. We don't know exactly the level of Holland's interest, and we don't know exactly what was going to given back. The rumor at the time, Bruce, was it was going to be Evan Bouchard and a first pick, which I thought was the most preposterous thing I'd ever heard. Well, one of them, because OEL at that point, there was a lot of people excited about bringing him in for a first pick when that was first talked about. There was many people who tweet and blog regularly about the Edmonton Oilers, who were okay with that idea. I was always iffy about it, because when I looked at OEL's long-term contract, I saw a real possibility to have negative value for years to come. And but then when I heard the Bouchard and a first for OEL, I just thought, this is madness. I mean,
Right.
but we don't know if Ken Holland was going to go there. But I'm going to say it seemed like there was a lot of smoke.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like there was a ton of smoke with Markstrom, and I didn't like that. Like, I didn't like it at the time, and I don't like it. Like, it's easier to say that now because Markstrom had a bad season. These long-term contracts with players into their 30s, I'm not a fan of them generally. There's exceptions to that rule, and I just think the fact that he was entertaining these two things is another kind of worrisome aspect of Ken Holland's time.
It's worrisome. I'm not going to give him a black mark, because in the end, neither one of those deals happened. In the case of OEL, the talk was that Holland drew the line when they wanted both Bouchard and the first, that was too high a price to pay, that there was some disagreement about whether Phoenix or Arizona, I should say, would retain some of his monstrous contract, which apparently they wanted to shed the whole thing. And for whatever reason, the deal fell apart. Well, it's to Holland's credit, one angle, that he did not pursue either player. It wasn't like he was so zoned in on Jacob Markstrom that well, whatever Calgary is going to pay you, we're going to give you one more year and $1 more million, no matter what. I mean, he didn't go there, and he finally said that the bar is too high, let him go. Which that at least final aspect of the decision, if it came to a decision from Holland, he didn't go over the top in either case. So I'll give him a little credit for that, and there's no reason not to inquire. But I mean, I wasn't. I'm a fan of OEL, but I think his best 8 years are behind him.
Yeah, and
his most expensive 8 are ahead of him. So that was a deal that kind of left me cold, no matter what the price was. Just having the idea, having that contract on the books for a large number of years was pretty scary.
I can't remember if I said this at the time, but my memory of what I was thinking is that even if they could get him for free on that deal, like, just we'll take over the contract, I was against it. I didn't want that to happen because I thought it's too much money over too long a term for a defenseman who's already clearly taken a step back in a season. That was evident from his numbers. He had already taken a step back, and he's heading into this new. I just thought, no, that's not a bet that the Oilers should make, even if they gave up nothing to get him.
Would you sign him as a free agent for the remainder of that contract?
Correct. I would not have.
My answer would have been no.
Yeah,
not at that price.
Yeah. So, and I think the Markstrom thing is similar. So that's why I think the OEL thing, we don't really know what happened, so it's hard to say. But Markstrom thing, I'm going to give him a definite black mark for being that long on a goalie at that age. All right, Bruce. My second good thing is Tyson Barrie. I'm going to say he hit a home run with Tyson Barrie. You get the top scoring defenseman in the NHL, even though some of his points were second assists. Top scoring defenseman in the NHL on a 1-year deal at $3.75 million, I believe it was. That's a home run. That's a Grand Slam home run, actually, because the price was so cheap and the term was so short. Well, you could argue maybe give him 2 years. That would have been better. But Tyson Barrie has enough deficiencies in his game that I'm glad that he doesn't have an extra year on that deal, because it's time for Evan Bouchard to get his time here. Yep. That was a great 1-year signing, though. Tyson Barrie was a very strong attacker on the Oilers this year. His defense was suspect, especially when he was put in a top pairing role. If they had used him in a third pairing role, this would have even been more of a home run. But they didn't have that luxury because they didn't feel they could trust other players in the top pairing with Darnell Nurse. But for who Tyson Barrie is, he had one of his best seasons in the NHL at a bargain price. He chose to come here. Holland was part of that persuasion. So, home run.
Yeah, I like that it was a 1-year deal, and I still like it's a 1-year deal. And I'll give him the home run at such point as he doesn't turn around and sign a massive long-term extension. The Oilers have a history of bringing in guys on 1-year deals, like Chris Russell, Alex Chason, dare I say, Devon Shore. Look at him for a year and like him, and then give him a raise. I mean, Shore didn't get much of a raise, but the other guys did, and they were locked up for a period of time. And so, and in each case, the extension arguably was, the original deal that they brought the guy in on was good, and then the subsequent deal was not so good. So we'll see what happens with Barrie. But on a 1 year basis, when they knew Oscar Klefbom was out for the year, that they didn't have necessarily a power play quarterback, that they weren't yet in position to say, okay, Evan Bouchard, number one right D, that job is yours. Come in and hit it out of the park. Because I don't think he was there yet. I'm not sure he's there now, but he's a lot closer to being there now than he was a year ago. And it's if it's one and done for Barrie, it was a win. And I mean, you could argue maybe they could have spent the money better somewhere else, but I'm not sure where under the circumstances, and
Yeah, well,
especially filling in for Clefbaum. They did try him on three right defense. That's where he played for the first 3 weeks of the season. You remember the Oilers were 3-6, and Barrie was like -6. He played some with Russell. He played some with Kook. And the power play took a while to get going. He had like 2 assists or something, and then in game 10, Ethan Bear, who had been playing with Darnell Nurse, got beamed by a puck while sitting on the bench and put him out for a month, and it set him back for longer than that. And Barrie got promoted, and they just took off. Barrie and Nurse were fire for like 2 months after that, piling up
yeah,
the points, outscoring big time on the other team at even strength, and Barrie was doing the job on the power play. And the Tyson Barrie that played between games 10 and 35 um, that was a real eye opener. But then I thought he slid significantly in the closing stages of the season, and so I mean, he is what he is. He's been that player the whole time. He's Justin Falk or Justin Schultz. He's a player that'll get you things in the offensive zone and give you things away in the defensive zone, and you pay for the points, but you pay in other ways for the defensive issues. So overall, though, definitely a plus for Holland to sign that player at that price for that term. 1 year was ideal. It was a speed bump for Evan Bouchard as opposed to a brick wall as if he'd signed him for several years.
hmm yeah. It worked with Barrie in the top pairing until it didn't,
Right.
and and then it really stopped working to the point where in the playoffs it was one of the factors of why they lost the series was they hadn't figured out who can succeed with Darnell Nurse. Maybe there was no answer this year. Could well
Hmm.
have been the case, right? And when they signed Barrie, Evan Bouchard was still iffy. By the time the season started, Bouchard was a lot less iffy. And it's, in retrospect, could they have used the money on a winger, like, made a big bid for Tyler Toffoli? But this was
Hmm.
total 2020 hindsight. At the time, that looked like a hell of a move. And it gave them everything they could have hoped, I think, from Tyson Barrie this year. So that's why I like that move. And if he did sign him, that to me would be a whole new transaction. That would be a whole new contract. Like you have to view
Right.
players now in
Right.
segments of their careers. So I don't. It's unlikely to happen. But if it did, it wouldn't take away from the smart move of signing him. It would just be a bad move to re up
Right.
when you have a cheaper version in Evan Bouchard. Bruce, what is your second moving the needle forward, if you have one?
Oh boy, moving the needle forward. Uh, I got a whole bunch of kind of neutral moves, to be honest. Things that maintain the status quo in the short run, that brought in NHL caliber players to depth positions at depth prices. Um, as for guys who hit it out of the park, oh boy, we talked about Smith and Barrie, who were veteran pros. We talked about Jesper Jarvi, who was a good patient bet on a developing player.
Any others that move the needle forward, would you say? Because I have
Uh,
one if you want to debate it, but I have
yeah,
one.
Okay,
I'm going to say Josh Archibald.
he
Move
was
the
on the
needle forward.
he was on the tip of my tongue
Okay. What do you think?
as being
You,
that. I like the player as for what he is, but what he is a limited player in the sense that he doesn't have a lot of offense. Um, he he's a torpedo. He certainly brings the physicality, and there would be he stands out like certain players on other teams stand out for just they're just hard nosed uh, play. He's a decent penalty killer. The coach certainly trusts him uh, to help maintain a lead at the end of the game. You'll put him out there, and of course, unfortunately, he kind of betrayed that trust with a stupid penalty he took in Game 3 in the Winnipeg series. Uh, Archibald at $1 million was a great deal when they brought him in. And here's another example. They signed the guy, and then they gave him a pretty nice raise, a 2-year extension at 1.5 million. And at that price, I'm not sure that's a whole lot of a bargain. I mean, I think he does have a place on the team, and he does have a specific job that he does. So I don't mind the player, and he does address uh, several issues that the Oilers had when they originally signed him, which was team speed, which was physicality, which was penalty killing, and which was depth scoring. And he came in, I think he got 10 goals last year, and he certainly helped the penalty kill. He certainly brought the physical play, and he's fast. So, he sort of checked a lot of boxes. So, I mean, credit for that. And then this year, I'm not sure there was enough sort of real progress there to justify the 50% pay rise.
Yeah, he's a decent third, fourth line winger who
Mm-hmm.
adds a couple kind of special skills in terms of he's fast, and the Oilers needed to get fast, and he's a fast hockey player, and he hits really hard. And this is something else that is will always be important in the playoffs, no matter which direction hockey goes. If you're fast and you can hit people, you can help your team win in the playoffs. So I I'm okay with him at that salary. I don't think that contract was a home run
Yeah.
because he's well paid for what he brings now
Right.
because he's a marginal two-way player. Like
Mm-hmm.
his offense is lacking. His defense is good, but his offense isn't great. It's mediocre at best. So yeah, that contract is iffier. But overall, bringing him into the organization, I'm going to say that moved the needle forward a bit. Same with Tyler Ennis. This is a smaller one. That trade
Mm-hmm.
where you gave up a fifth round, sixth round pick for Tyler Ennis,
Right. Fifth
and
rounder.
fifth rounder, and you got back someone who's contributed to the team the entire time he's been here and has been a decent player. That's a really small move of the needle, and there's all kinds of these ones where they're, you know,
Mm-hmm.
Gaetan Haas, Riley Shea, and Joachim Nygaard. These are all in the category of these little tiny little bets that are I don't think are really. I'm glad he makes so many of them because I think that's kind of a positive. He makes so many that they if some Yurcho doesn't turn out, if Granlund doesn't turn out, then only get a little bit more from this other guy, and it's. I think overall, on all those little deals he's made, it's maybe a bit of a net positive, when you include Ennis in the first Archibald deal, because he's made so many of them. Bruce, I'm going to
Well,
also include. Go ahead.
the end of Steele, the fifth rounder was just for what he brought at the end of 2019-20. And of course, they signed him as an unrestricted free agent. Uh, and he actually went to market, and they brought him back the first day of the
Yeah.
market at a small raise, which he earned off of a pretty good season in 2019-20. Uh, but he's scored since he's been with the Oilers. He's played 44 games, and he scored 6 goals. And offense, he's brought in for his offense. He's certainly not a good defensive player in my view, and I don't think our stats support him as being a good defensive
He's
player. And
he
I
was
don't
a
think the coach
weak.
likes his defense, which is why he
Yeah.
spent so much time on the taxi squad. So to me, he's a wash. He's not a needle mover for sure.
Yeah, his defensive play was really weak. All right, Bruce, the obvious bad contract we have yet to talk about is Zack Kassian.
Hmm.
I think I don't think anyone would say this that the 4-year deal that Zack Kassian signed in January 2020, just before COVID, um, was a good deal at this point. It
Hmm.
was arguable at the time when it looked
Hmm.
like the cap might go up. Right now, it's a clear, definite overpay, and I'm going to say that's a move the needle back for sure. He he. It's interesting though because people there's still like, would you trade him? It's a question that comes up, and a lot of people wouldn't because they love the fact that he's such a tough player. And in the playoffs, you need tough players, is the argument. And the Oilers, if you move him, then you're going to be looking for someone to fill his role,
Hmm.
and you might not find that player. So it's I'm
What
kind
is
of
that
I'm
role?
well, third line winger, fourth line winger who can play hockey in the NHL, play at an NHL level, and provide an intimidating presence to go wag his finger at people at the face-off circle if they get in Connor McDavid's face. The $3.2 million was the predicated on him being able to do that on Connor McDavid's line,
Yes.
and that's why he's a def. I don't think there's anyone. There's very few people who would say he's not overpaid on the Oilers, and that cap using that amount of cap space on a player like him is not moves the needle back for the team. It's
Hmm.
significant enough that it moves the table back, even if he did his job. So the question is he doing his job this year? It's mixed up with some injuries that he had,
Right.
which makes it a little harder to rate him. He looked in the final playoff game, at least he was, maybe the final two playoff games, he was kind of doing that role. And I was thinking, oh yeah, he's doing that role. And anytime a player's doing his role, even if he's overpaid for it, I have a little bit different feeling about him. So what's your take, Bruce? Would you like would you keep him or not right now?
The timing of the signing was a little bit questionable. I mean, this was January of 2020, and this was coming off of fabulous 2019, where in the second half of the previous season and the first half of that season, he'd played 82 games in calendar 2019, scored 24 goals, 50 points, almost all of them at even strength. Like he was a big producer. And
Wow.
then in January, he had that game where Matt Kachuk ran him 3 times, and of course he lost his cool and went after Kachuk and laid a beat down on him, but at a significant cost of a Calgary power play that produced the game-winning goal for Calgary in that game. I remember giving him a harsh grade because I thought he'd hurt the team in that game, and then he got suspended. And during the time he was suspended, there was this groundswell of public support and love for Kassian because everybody around here hates Matthew Kachuk so much that the image of Zack Kassian laying a beating on him sort of superseded the fact, well, hey, we lost that game because of that, and before he even played another game, the day that he was signed was the day he was eligible to return to the ice. And from that day to this, if he's played 5 decent games for the Oilers, I've forgotten 3 of them. You know, he just didn't bring it back, uh, and he I mean, I thought at the time, I'd rather this guy was motivated through the playoffs. He still got 2 months to sign him after that. And of course, this was before COVID. But when after COVID and they came in and in the playoffs last year, he was just MIA. He didn't
He's
do a thing in that
oh
series, like
yeah.
nothing.
And how many
And
times
then
have we
this,
heard the excuse, Bruce? Oh well, he needs the fans
well,
to
he
get
needs
revved up.
3.2 million bucks to motivate him. And if that
Yeah.
doesn't do it, then I don't know, David. And I understand that he is a player that does feed off of the emotion in the building, but he's also a professional hockey player, and he's got to summon the motivation. And honestly, this whole season that was passed, I mean, obviously the 2 injuries were, but he wasn't playing well, and the one fight that he was in all season with Eric Goodbranson was after Dave Tippett called him out for being not being a factor. In the next game, he thought, I'll get myself going by getting into a fight. And he got into the fight 2 seconds into his first shift. And of course, he broke his hand and was out for weeks. So obviously that didn't well. But the rationale for that fight was because he was in the doghouse, was the impression left. And then of course the second injury that he got when he tried to hit Shea Weber, well, that's just bad luck. Like, he was doing his job there, and he got hurt, and he missed the whole rest of the regular season. But he did show a little bit in the playoffs. But boy, I'm not going to give him a passing grade based on a couple of decent games. You expect a lot more for $3.2 million.
So it looks like they could move him, Bruce. It looks like
There might be a market.
we've heard rumors that teams like Pittsburgh or Boston even might be interested in Zack Kassian.
Rangers.
Yeah, for Jacob DeBrusk is one of the names that has come up recently, and
Done deal.
it's it would be listen. The reason I'd be tempted to move him is when you look at hockey enforcers, that's a really tough job. You don't find many of them into their 30s who get that job done in a very effective way. It's usually a job by a younger player, and I'm not sure that Zack Kassian, he's got 3 years left at $3.2 million. The hope that he's going to come through in that role, I think when I weigh everything, I would also move him. If you get a chance to move him, because I think he's on the downward slope of his career right now. And his career, it's a weird, because there's no downward, there's no slope like this for Zack Kassian. Zack Kassian's like this,
Yeah.
or he's like this. I don't know if you can see that. He has great periods. When he first came to the Oilers, great period. Playoffs 2017, fantastic. Everyone loves Zack Kassian. After that, he crashed hard, and there was all kinds of talk about trading him, not bringing. And then all of a sudden, he gets his chance with McDavid, and it's shooting up again. And as you point out, for almost a full calendar year, it's like at this high level again. And then since then, in the last calendar year, it's been crashed again. So it's like it's rags to riches to rags to riches with Zack Kassian. Do I think that there could be another riches period? Yes. In a playoff series, or for 30, 40 games in a regular season, you could be so glad you have this player on your team. That could happen. It could happen if he gets traded to Boston. So this is my hesitation about him. He could have these moments again. But the likelihood of any player having those moments as they head into their 30s, especially a big, rough, physical player, goes down considerably. So I just think if you're looking at hockey actuarials, if you get a chance to move Zack Kassian, move him. And he is overall, that contract, if you can move it, then it's not really a down thing, is it? It's not, it doesn't move the needle back. But it has moved the needle back so far, and it's likely to in the future. So that's why I'm going to say this is a moving the needle back kind of thing for Ken Holland.
Well, if you move him and you don't have to retain, or you don't have to take a bad contract back, and someone who thinks that he's value for money and they give you a fair exchange for him, then yeah, of course. But I'll be interested to see what might be on offer. I do know that after Tom Wilson ran roughshod over New York Rangers, that they're supposedly looking for such a player. Now, in my view, Kassian, he fights his own battles. I'm not sure that I see him as a guy that goes out to avenge teammates and that sort of traditional enforcer role. Like when he took on Matt Tkachuk, it was because Matt Tkachuk had run him personally, and there was one scrum in one game this year where someone was giving McDavid the gears, and Kassian got in there and sort of took command of the situation. The old Dave Semenko style, but just the once, and I don't see that as being necessarily part of what he does. He plays a rugged game when he's on his game, and some see him as a poor man's Tom Wilson. Well, I don't watch Tom Wilson near as much as I watch Zack Kassian, but I never see Tom Wilson in a game where I don't notice him. Whereas Kassian, that happens far, far too often.
Bruce, in terms of moving the needle, I'm gonna say that there is one more thing that moved the needle, and this is it's a little iffier, but I think moving out Milan Lucic moved the needle in a significant
Mm-hmm.
way for the Oilers. And I think you could argue that since then the deal has worked out maybe maybe better. Like when you get the third round, when you include the draft pick that was compensation, fairly or unfairly. But let's just not get into that. But it happened. So when you include the draft pick,
Yeah.
it's going to the Flames, the third round draft pick. Lucic has given the Flames what they needed. I
Mm-hmm.
think that they're overall pretty happy with him. James Neal had a really good first year, and then got COVID, and this year was a bit of a wipeout for him. I'm going to suggest because of that. I've liked James Neal though. I think he's a smart defensive player, and he's added on the attack. At least in his first year, when he was healthy, he added on the attack, especially on the power play. I think though, let's just say overall the Flames, in terms of how they perform for the team, Lucic has given the Flames more of what they needed as compared to Neal giving what the Oilers they needed. The Flames have won that in that regard. But I'm going to still go back to the time of the trade. I just think
Mm-hmm.
it was an absolutely essential trade for the franchise, and there was broad agreement at the time. There was people were ecstatic on the
Oh
day
yeah.
that trade was made, and I don't think it was just a small amount of people. I'm just looking if I did a poll then. I'm looking to find the
Oh
results, but I
no.
think it was a huge amount of people, including us, including me, thought Holland made that trade without having to swallow the biggest of poison
Mm-hmm.
pills. We were worried it was going to be horrible,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't. It was it was kind of it was kind of okay, maybe. Who knows? But that felt like a huge win at the time, and it was, I think, objectively a huge win at the time. And I think it moved the dial. It got the Oilers out of this thing that was haunting them, this Milan Lucic contract that Chiarelli had given to Milan.
Mm-hmm.
Hadn't worked out. Lucic, I think, had it in Edmonton. I don't. I
Yeah.
got the sense that he was done here,
Mm-hmm.
and they had to do something. And I thought it really moved the needle for the franchise at the time. And even though it's kind of maybe afterwards, I'm not. They can still buy out Neal,
Right.
um, and they couldn't do that with Lucic. They didn't know if he would waive his no movement clause or not in expansion.
Which he
I
did.
think he has for Calgary. There's been a few things that have made this deal look better for Calgary over time.
Yep.
That's what happens in hockey deals, and we rate them on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the things that have happened in favor of Calgary, that's their business.
Right.
This moved the needle for the Oilers. It got them out of a contract they needed to get out of without swallowing the worst of poison pills. And I like that move still.
Right. Well, I wrote a fairly controversial post last year looking at that deal from kind of from a Calgary perspective. And yeah, Holland, like they didn't swallow a big poison pill, but they sure took on a few little ones, and one not so little one. If you're Daryl Cates, that had to pay out an extra $9 million over and above the 42 million that Shirley signed the original contract for, and because Lucic had been prepaid so significantly with bonuses and front-loaded contract, whereas Neal's was just a straight same price every year. But they both had 4 years left at equivalent dollars. The second poison pill was that the Oilers agreed to retain $750,000. So they wound up getting Neal for what amounted to 6.5 million for Calgary getting Lucic at 5.25. Well, a difference of over $1 million. You expect to have a significantly better player. And in the 2 seasons since, both short seasons, I believe Lucic has one more point than Neal does. Neal did a lot of damage early, and it helped the Oilers. Like he was part of the reason they got out of the gate so fast in 2019-20 when they won their first 5 games and just got the jump right out of the bat. And he was filling the net. You remember, I think he had 8 goals in those 5 games or something like that. He was just on fire, and uh, but he got hurt, and he had 19 goals through December 31st of that year. He had a hat trick on New Year's Eve, and then he never scored another goal for the entire season. And of course, he missed a month with an injury, and the last month never happened because of COVID. So it wasn't quite so long a stretch as it sounded, but it was like 16 or 18 games or something. They never scored. And then this past season, with his own health issues from COVID being a major contributor, he didn't move the needle at all. I didn't think in a positive way. Very slow, and just didn't win many races. Scored a small handful of goals, but uh, he was 5.7 or sorry 5.75 million plus $750,000 for what they got out of the guy. And sure, they don't have to protect him for the Seattle expansion draft, but it's not like Seattle's going to pick him. And he's still got 2 years to run, and the big advantage of him is that he can be bought out. Well, that you know, there's another poison pill. Okay, we pay $9 million. Uh, there was an issue with the salary cap. There's the third round draft pick that you mentioned that I didn't. And the best solution is that this is a guy that can be bought out. I mean, it just goes to show how terrible was the Lucic contract in the first place, that they had to take it that far. And Lucic had issues that I think were sort of underlying the trade. Like you say, it felt like the Oilers had to move on from him no matter what it took. And they did swallow some poison pills. And
Yeah.
they didn't get a guy that moved the needle for more than that first few weeks of his first season here.
They yeah. Another thing was the Oilers were too slow. Like Lucic is such a slow hockey player. I guess they like him in Calgary. I'm glad they like him.
But
Neil's not a
Neil's not
Neil's
a speedster either, though.
he's not a speedster, but he is. I'm going to say he's a little faster a little more effective on the forecheck. But I haven't seen Lucic enough in Calgary to make my own assessment. I'd get the general sense that people like his play down there. Bruce, there's a number of moves where Holland traded draft picks at the deadline for players. Kulikov for a fourth, Mike Green turned out to be a fourth, and Andreas Athanasiou for 2 seconds. Mm-hmm. And again, there's a COVID aspect to this, and yep. Athanasiou and Green didn't get proper time to fit in with the team because the season was canceled, and then they get back. And I think the rumor is Athanasiou was not in great shape coming back, which is really disappointing. But then that goes to, what do you know about this player, Ken Holland? Is he? Yeah, you should know him. So I think these are all significant moving the dial back moves. Like the fourth round picks, less so for Kulikov and Green. But the 2 seconds for Athanasiou, he made a significant bet on this player who just showed next to nothing when he was with the Oilers. Even when he first joined the team, there wasn't a lot there. He didn't have great hockey sense to fit in with the other attacking players on the team. He didn't, you couldn't, in the playoffs, they put him with Draisaitl. That was a nightmare. I mean, Draisaitl needs to play with other smart hockey players because he's such a smart one. You're just wasting the guy if you put him with a guy who just rips up and down his wing and, doesn't move the puck when it needs to be moved. And he didn't fit in with McDavid because, he's not a great checking hockey player. McDavid needs to play with players who are strong defensively, I believe. And it was just a mess, that trade. And again, this is where we get back to my initial hesitancy about the Oilers right now and about Holland. This is the pro scouting department. Start adding it up. Turris, Green, Athanasiou, Kulikov. This is a not inconsiderable list in 2 seasons of players who have they not just invested in their salaries, but they gave up something to get all of them except for Turris. And they have a problem, Bruce, with their pro scouting. And I don't think Ken Holland recognizes he's not going to do anything about it. And it doesn't make me confident heading into this offseason that they are going to make the right decisions on who to bring in for this team. They have all this money to spend. It just makes me worried, honestly, that they're going to sign kind of the new Milan Lucic contract is on its way, is what I'm worried about for this summer as much as anything. So I hope they get it right. But based on their track record, I mean, do I have confidence that they're going to get it right? This isn't exactly Glenn Sather in 1985, or maybe Ken Holland in 2003 or whatever. He's not consistently making the right moves.
Yeah, well, it's trading a draft pick for a player at the deadline it's a fairly easy trade to make if you're buying, there's teams there are buyers and sellers at the deadline. You identify a seller, you go out and you bring in a player. Uh, but I would argue none of the guys that he brought in seeding those draft choices really moved the needle. Tyler Ennis a little bit last year, but I mean, he had a couple of goals and one in the playoffs.
He helped a
And
bit, Bruce, I'd say. Ennis
yeah,
helped.
little bit. Um, uh, but moved the needle? No. Did he move into the top six and stay there? No. So, and trading the draft picks for expiring contracts. Well, this goes back to before Ken Holland, but in 2018, the Oilers had 5 of their 7 draft picks because they traded away. And in 2019, they had 6 out of 7. 2020, they had 6 out of 7. 2021, they only have 5 out of 7, and 3 of those 5 are in the last 2 rounds. In 2021, in 2021, they have 5 out of 7. In 2022, they've already traded one for the Kulikov transaction. Kulikov's an expired contract already, and here's another draft pick gone in the future. And they don't ever seem to be accumulating much in the way of draft picks coming the Oilers' way, and they're always short at the draft. They don't, for a team that's supposedly trying to build from within, how can you go into, I mean, at this point, I mean, obviously things could change for the next 2 drafts, but they're down 1 to 2 draft picks, 5 drafts in a row where they've been below. And so instead, and I think this is Ken Holland's long-term strategy, is you need to bring up players from within your own system that can solve some of these problems. Like if you're trading for third liners at the deadline because you don't have enough third liners that you can count on, well, you haven't been doing it right. And the Oilers, I mean, in their bottom 6, Jujhar Khaira, and then right at the end of the season, Ryan McLeod. Those are the only guys that actually were drafted by and developed by the Oilers, and the rest were guys that they either picked off of the discard pile, UFA time, or the guys that they traded draft picks to bring in, and it's a losing strategy. And I get that as short term, and I think Holland limited it this year after going all in last year and trading away all those picks. But when you look at some of the bargains that could be had, those 2 second-round picks that he gave up for Athanasiou, you know what it cost Colorado Avalanche to bring in Devon Taves from New York Islanders? 2 second-round draft picks. And they were lower picks because Colorado had finished way ahead of Edmonton in the standings, that they gave up for Devon Taves, who was, then signed to a very, very good 4-year contract by Colorado, and he's part of the solution there. And you'd like to be seeing something like that when you're trading away draft picks. If somewhere you got some guy that really hits it and turns out to be a value player for you for a longer term.
This is one of the issues of rating hockey management. So much has to do with
what happens next,
what happens with the draft, with the players they've drafted, and we won't know that.
Right.
So you're right. He is going for this strategy of draft and development, and he held off. There was lots of pressure on him to make a big move this year at the trade deadline, and he made a small move, bringing in Kulikov. If all these moves had happened without the Athanasiou trade, I think it would have, this is the big one, the 2 second picks, because second picks have considerable value, much higher than lower round draft picks. Mm-hmm. And so we don't know, though. We know we've given up these picks. What we don't know is the picks that he has made. Have they turned out? Philip Broberry, Raphael Lavoie, Ilya Konovalov, Matej Blumel, Thomas Mazura, and Maxime Denizhikin in the first year. These are players. A lot of them are trending pretty well.
Yeah.
Blumel has had a really strong scoring season, I believe, in the Czech league, Slovak league. This last draft, Dylan Holloway, he shot up like you know, his value, the way people see him now, is much better based on
Yeah.
a breakout scoring year in U.S. college
Hmm.
hockey in his second season there. That pick looks really good. Carter Savoy went into U.S. college hockey and lit it up, especially initially, but had a really strong attacking season. Tyler Tulio played in Slovakia and looked good. So there's lots of positive looking things. Raphael Lavoie played well in Sweden this year, and he did okay in Bakersfield down there. So there's lots of positive things. The Philip Broberry pick is a controversial pick because they could have had Cole Caulfield or Trevor Zegras, and we'll see how that it works
Hmm.
out. It typically takes D-men longer than forwards to make an impact in the NHL. I think it's premature to make a call whether the Oilers blew that pick or not.
Right.
Um,
It is.
it's premature. You could say what we know now
Hmm.
compared to then is it looks a little iffier now than it did then because of the success of players drafted behind you. But that's always the case that in
Hmm.
any draft, players are going to develop at different rates, and players drafted after you, the player you took, there's going to be some more successful players almost always after the player
Yeah.
you took. The key is, does the player you pick turn out and help your team long term? And we can't answer that with Philip Broberry yet or
Hmm.
Dylan Holloway yet. But I think there's enough positive in those drafts, Bruce, that there's some hope there. I think the Tyler Wright has been deeply involved in the draft, and it seems like he's doing an okay job. I don't have the same concern about amateur scouting. Amateur scouting on the Oilers has actually been pretty good under Chiarelli, and it looks like it's probably continuing under Holland. We can't say for sure. We can say for sure that under Chiarelli, it worked out pretty well. They got some good players in the draft. And overall, they were at least an average team in the draft and probably above average, maybe even a good NHL team. You'd have to rank all these drafts under Chiarelli. Holland, the jury's out, but we'll see how it turns out. I again though, that if they don't fix their pro scouting, Bruce, if Ken Holland doesn't fix his pro scouting, he's not going to succeed in Edmonton. And I don't know if he's going to do. I don't think he's going to do it.
Yeah. The pro scouting has been a thorn in our side for too long, and say, I mean, bringing in Archie Henderson from Detroit, where I'd say his track record is pretty mixed, and I wouldn't say that it's gotten any real clear here. Like, where are the big wins of? I mean, I guess you can say Tyson Barrie. I'm not sure that's pro
Yeah.
scouting. I mean, everybody knew what Tyson Barrie was, and it was the right situation. And it sounds like he reached out to the team that that he wanted to be in a situation where he could succeed, and he recognized Edmonton as a good fit. Well, they probably both did, and I mean, credit to Holland for that, but credit to it things worked out. I'm not sure how much the pro scouting had to do with it.
So Henderson was a scout in Washington, pro scout in Washington. I'm
Hmm.
getting pop-ups blocking the view here. Okay. Through the 90s and in the early
Hmm.
2000s. And then he was out, it looks like he was, as far as I can tell, he was out of hockey for 13 years
Well,
before. I just had a little pop up issue again. Before, it's hard to look at these websites because things keep popping up. Before Holland brings him back as a pro scout in Detroit for, in 2015-16, a scout for 4 seasons in Detroit. And those 4 seasons, I'm going to take a closer look at this about exactly what moves they made.
hmm.
And then he's been the director of professional scouting in Edmonton the last 2 years. I think they need to get rid of Archie Henderson. I'll just say it right now. Based on what I've seen so far, that's the move Ken Holland has to make. And he didn't make these moves in Detroit with his scouts. He let his amateur scouts get long in tooth, and they stopped doing a great job for him in the last 10 years that he was the GM of Detroit. And he just kept the same group who had been fabulously successful before, I should add.
Hmm.
It was his Barry Fraser period it was his Barry Fraser uh, system where the Oilers got such great value out of Barry Fraser in his first years as a scout, and then in his last year he was one of the worst scouts in the NHL under Glenn Sather, and they let it drag on and on,
10
and
years.
yeah, 15 years, and it really hurt the franchise. Well, That's what Holland did with his scouts in amateur scouts in Detroit. Now Tyler Wright had kind of a mixed record when he was
Mm-hmm.
leading. He was brought in as a new guy in Detroit, and he had kind of a mixed record. I'd have to look again with one more
Right.
season to fully rate that. Tyler Wright seems to be doing maybe okay here, but Archie Henderson, no, I don't see any indication that he should be in the position that he's in. So sorry, Archie, it's not personal. I'm just going on if you're listening to this, I'm just going on your record, and it ain't there. You're not getting it done. I doubt he's listening, but just in case.
Where's our next Steve Stais? That's what I'm waiting for. Guy that's been around, been in the league, maybe underrated and ready to make a move. Where's our Chandler Stevenson? I mean, there are guys out there that when they go to a new team, they suddenly blossom,
Where's our
and
Sam
somebody
Girard?
somewhere
Yeah.
has seen the seeds and the sprouts that are going to grow into a nice player. And so the other class of player that Holland's brought in are the Euros. And we've just seen two of them head back to Europe in Gaetan Haas and Joachim Nygaard, both of whom signed long-term deals in their home countries, 5 and 6 years. Uh, Third one that he brought over that he gets credit for is Theodor Lindstrom. In each case, we're talking about a guy that's like mid 20s or beyond that's never played outside of their own country. That they thought, here's a player that's good enough that we think maybe he can make the jump and be an effective NHLer. And to the credit of both Haas and Nygaard, they showed flashes that they could be players, but ultimately they didn't move the needle either. And in the meantime, they were on the roster for 2 years, taking, space that, and, opportunity costs. Like, I mean, Tyler Benson, he's been held down in the minors all this time because they've got, a bunch of sort of third and fourth and fifth and sixth line left wingers ahead of him. And maybe they would have been better off to invest some of that time in a younger guy like him. So it's, again, a double-edged sword.
I disagree on Haas and Nygaard, Bruce. I think those were good bets
Mm-hmm.
because they're low dollar bets. They could
Right.
have set them to the minors, and there wouldn't have
Mm-hmm.
been a big issue. They're just picking. That's the coach who's picking
Mm-hmm. Right.
Nygaard over Benson. It's Holland who's giving the coach the choice.
Right.
So that's on Tippett, not on Holland.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's
Right.
Holland's job to give the coach lots of options, and he did that with these two players. And with if they hadn't been injured, which is always a wild card with any player, including Oscar Klefbom. I mean, how do we look at the Oscar Klefbom contract now? I mean, it was a great contract at the time, and now he's injured. So Haas and Nygaard were also injured, and
Nygaard
Nygaard was, and Haas got sick with a significant disease. Right. So I like that Holland did that. I like that general proclivity to bring in these guys on these cheap deals, and I think these are. I hope he makes 5 more bets like this summer, not just Devon Shore, but 5 more contracts like that, and hopefully some of them will pan out.
No, that's the thing. It'd be nice to see someone pan out in a significant way that, showed up on McDavid's line and started putting the puck in the net. Sure, it'd be nice to get a guy like that.
Well, Cahoon was their bet this year, right, on that. Like, so he's another example. Like, did that work out? It was a good bet. Everyone, I think,
no argument.
Everyone thinks that's a good bet to make. He had, almost the same points per 60 in the previous 2 seasons as Taylor Hall at even strength. So that looked like a good bet. It didn't particularly pan out, but I like when the GM's making moves like that. That could have really paid dividends. I think it just didn't seem to. Bruce, some people might think, well, that I'm being too harsh on Archie Henderson, like he's only had 2 years at this job, and you gotta no. And I just think no, that the shelf life of GMs is like you can tell right away with pro scouts. It's harder to tell with amateur scouts if it's worked out. We can see a distinct trend here in pro scouts. This is an urgent matter. This isn't like something you can wait another year, go through one more summer of this. You cannot do that because the Oilers are in a win now mode. This is the biggest summer they have. They need better advice. Ken Holland needs better advice. Is it too late to get that at this late date? If you sign someone from another NHL team, could you get a scout who could be your top guy. Maybe you just go with Keith Gretzky. You change his role because he seemed to have a little bit better. Maybe, possibly, I don't know. I don't know if it's possible to get someone better, but I know that this hasn't worked out and it is time to move on. So, and 2 years is ample time for this kind of job when you're the main guy. Unless they're saying, well, Ken Holland saying Fantasio Green, those are all on me. I was the key guy there. But then Archie should have been talking him out of it if it wasn't a good idea, because he was also in Detroit. They also had high knowledge of these players. Mm-hmm. So Bruce, yeah, I'm worried about this summer. Mm-hmm. And I'm more worried as I talk, because I'm just starting to write a post about this, putting together all the information.
Right.
When you start to add it all up, it's less than zero in the acquisition of pro hockey players with the Edmonton Oilers overall. Especially if you don't include Puljujarvi, and if you credit Archibald and Smith to Dave Tippett, mm-hmm. or did Tippett coach Archibald? I can't recall. If you credit Mike Smith to Tippett,
I don't think so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think he did. But so you can give Archibald to Archie Henderson in that regime, and Slater Koekkoek, I think, was another decent little bet there, but they had all seen Slater Koekkoek play.
Right, got Archie Henderson's page open. What date did he come on board with the Oilers? It seemed to me there was some lag time after Holland, but I don't know exactly when he was in that picture.
It doesn't say, Bruce, and it doesn't. I think the moves that we're talking about all happened at the trade deadline and last summer. Generally speaking, the bad moves signed by
because Archibald was signed, of course, in July of 2019. I just can't remember if Henderson was there yet.
July 12th, 2019.
Ooh, okay, right. I think that's just before they signed the other Archie.
He replaced Dwayne Sutter, who had to go
mm-hmm.
as well, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
That wasn't Keith Gretzky's job. That was Dwayne Sutter's job, and he had botched it horribly. And now this is such a crucial job, especially in the modern NHL. And it's a job where you get pretty instantaneous feedback on your decisions. It's time to move on.
Well, you need to win a trade, or you need to win a free agent signing somewhere along the line. And I don't mean of really well-known commodities either, but of talented guys that are bubbling under that need the right chance. And arguably, you could say that was Josh Archibald, but it's not a long list of guys that have moved the needle. As we've been the theme of this podcast. They've got a whole lot of sort of break even at best. What was it McTavish said about his bottom six? Says we seem to have a whole bunch of guys that the best you can hope for is like break even.
Hey, if Kyle Turris had broken even, I would have been ecstatic.
Well, yeah, that was the best we could have hoped for, and it didn't happen. Yeah.
Well, okay, Bruce, let's finish it off. Let's give an overall. Has he moved the needle forward, or has he moved it back? And this is hard because, again, we don't have a major piece. We don't know how Dylan Holloway and Raphael LeBlanc, Philip Broberg are going to turn out. So, but has he moved it forward or moved it back?
I think he's stabilized. I stopped much of the bleeding that was happening under Peter Chiarelli, which was one bad deal after another before the guy left. Although to Chiarelli's credit, the drafting record was pretty solid. He's reaping some of the benefits from that. He's got the farm teams in a good place, and they are graduating some players to the NHL. I think with the big club, obviously the team itself got a lot better in the last 2 years. They made the playoffs both years and soared up the charts. So points for that. I'm getting impatient, got to say. He preaches patience, but I guess he hasn't been in Edmonton since 1971 like I have. And for sure, he hasn't been in Edmonton since 2007, like many of us have that have just seen the team struggle. And then they're a nicer team now, but largely they're being pulled along by the guys he inherited. And the same could have been said about Peter Chiarelli when he took over. Well, uh, Nurse and Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins and Clefbaum were already here, and he had the number one overall draft choice in his pocket that anybody would have spent on Connor McDavid. I don't give Chiarelli any credit for that. And after that, I mean, those are still sort of the mainstay players here for the Oilers. You look at at Ken Holland's Edmonton Oilers today. Well, they have three guys that are, sort of major. Um, they're the ones that are pulling the team along as far as it's gone. And McDavid, Draisaitl, and Nurse. Well, those are all draft picks from the middle of last decade, and it's time to see a supporting cast, and with some top six, the Rich Winter crew, top seven forwards, the top four defensemen, the number one goalie. And he's got a lot of holes to fill, David, this summer. They got one top four defenseman under contract right now. One proven top four defenseman, unless you call Chris Russell, who used to be a top four defenseman, but at age 34, they got three that are going to UFA. They're still struggling with that 3C issue. They're still struggling with wings on the top two lines. Like, there's a lot of holes out of that 12. How many guys of those 12 men, and their number one goalie is a UFA. How many of those 12 spots are filled? Well, you got McDavid, you got Draisaitl, you got Nurse. And then what do you got? You got Puljujarvi. Yamamoto arguably is a top six, top
yeah,
nine.
Yamamoto, Bear are kind of tweeners, right? Like
Yeah.
we're not
Second
sure.
or third line, but
Yeah.
we
don't have RNH under contract, and we
No.
don't know actually what to do with him either, because he didn't play. He didn't fit in with McDavid. He's never established himself. This past season, he didn't establish himself as definitely your second line center either. And then he didn't play with the dynamite line. Like, he didn't, the line he had thrived with, which gave everybody such hope of Nugent Hopkins on the wing. They didn't use him there that much. So it's just all there's a certain amount of frustration. Bruce, I just wonder, though, how much there's a bit of recency bias in all of us, where we have a very sour taste in our mouths because of what happened in the playoffs last year and this year. Now, when you frame it as, hey, Ken Holland took a team that didn't make the playoffs 2 years in a row and was in disarray. And he's come in and stabilized things. And 2 years in a row, he's taken his Oilers team to second in the division both years. And they've looked like they've got some good drafts. And he's made a few good moves. He brought Puljujarvi back, and so if you just forget these playoff defeats, and that's what we're we try to train ourselves to do, is like, don't put too much weight in the terrible disappointment of the playoffs. Don't think everything's horrible and bad because that didn't work out. Be careful of that in terms of it influencing, coloring your entire evaluation of a player, of a coach, and of a GM. So I'm going to put that in place here and say, I'm going to agree with you. He stabilized things. There's been some good moves. All that said, and I don't think this has to do with the playoffs. They have a problem in pro scouting that they need to fix. And Ken Holland, as the top hockey man, has got to recognize that and fix it. And if he doesn't, I'm really worried. I don't think they're going to make the right moves this summer, Bruce. I think they're going to make the wrong moves. And these are big moves. And these are huge moves that the franchise is predicated on. The Connor McDavid era rests on this. And if it has to do with people who have a weak track record in pro scouting, move them out.
Well, they've had the 2 years Holland's been here. They've had the number one, number two scorers in the NHL. And they finished 11th in goals for one of the years. And I think they made it all the way up to 7th this year, when they had like two guys that were just miles ahead of the rest of the league, like 105, 84, 69. I mean, they have this gold mine of offensive production, and yet somehow they're not a dominant offensive team. Like, they should be leading the league in goals. If they got the two highest scorers in the league, they're not even close to that. So time for that supporting cast. Where is it? So I'm getting impatient. Sorry.
It could be worse. At least we have our first round draft pick this year, and we
Hmm.
didn't trade it for like the Patrick Marleau trade that cost Toronto Seth Jarvis. And now
Yeah.
Toronto traded. They were going for it. They went all in, and they traded for Foligno,
Hmm.
and they gave up their first pick. I don't. Did he? I guess he was banged up a little bit, but I
That's the
mean
risk you pay. You take.
his level of scoring in the regular season before they traded for the guy Bruce
Hmm.
was at the right around the Kyle Turris level of scoring at even strength, Foligno. So
He
it
was
wasn't
great
like
against Toronto in the bubble playoffs in 2020 when he was
oh
with
oh
Columbus. He had a
oh
great series against them. And so it wasn't, it wasn't quite Jared Smithson winning faceoffs in the Florida series, but it was, it certainly was an observation bias of him because he really was terrific in that Columbus defeat of Toronto in the bubble. But they paid a high price for him.
yeah. Okay, so we're left there. We're not exactly in an optimistic place right now. We're kind of in a show me phase.
Show me
Show
state.
me phase. And if yeah, and this is a big year for Holland, and it's a big year for Tippett. They could all be gone by the end of next season. But if that's just a tragedy for the franchise if it turns out that way, because how long will Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl ride this out? Ken Holland has got a big summer ahead of him, and we'll leave it there, Bruce. We will, unless you have something else to add.
No, it's put up or shut up time. I think they got to make realistic positive forward steps, and not something that might come to fruition 3 years down the road. But they got to fill some of these holes in the key positions on the roster.
Okay, here's my advice to Ken Holland. If you've identified 10 players that you're interested in right now, I want you to hire Ken Holland. I want you to hire Bruce McCurdy on a 1 month contract, 2 months, or however long it takes to go over the video of these players. That's all Bruce is going to do. He's going to go over the video of these players and he's going to give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
I want the Kassian money.
That's that is my recommendation for Ken Holland.
Yeah, well, I think I'm pretty sure they're doing that, but I'm not sure they're doing enough of it. And they've only, they're. I guess one last concern I have with Holland is uh, his lips are moving when he talks about analytics, but I'm not seeing the evidence that the uh, underlying foundation is there for the club, sort of turning over all the rocks on the players that are available and knowing what they need to know. Like if you looked at Kyle Turris um, underlying numbers last year, you would have seen red flags. And same can be said about other guys that they brought in. And uh, yeah, I'm not saying they even necessarily need to be leading the league, but when I look at a list showing 105 people hired by NHL franchises who do that job, and the Oilers had one on the list. I guess they hired. There's two brothers now that are doing it, but they're also doing work visas and I don't know what all else. That it's not like it's 100% their job. And I just think the franchise. I mean, this isn't a cap expense. You can bring guys in and at a fraction of the cost that you're paying management to, and I just think you could buttress the team in that department. And Holland's talking about goals for, goal differential, even strength goal differential. Well, it's important, but it's only scratching the surface of kind of information that's out there.
Here's what I would say, Bruce, to Holland on this point is that we know Dave Tippett does analytics, and I actually think he does. I don't know for sure, but it sounds to me like he's doing something very similar to what you and I do. We know that definitely he looks at scoring chances for
Hmm.
and against when they're on the ice.
Hmm.
My understanding is I think he's also looking for which players actually make the plays, who contributes, who makes the mistakes. This is
Yep.
his process on his own team. I think that's an extremely useful process for any NHL coach to be doing with his own team, and it gives Dave Tippett a good handle on which players are playing well and which aren't playing well. Whatever the on ice analytics say, if he's not looking at, I'm okay if he doesn't look at that. If he's doing that work along with what he sees during the game, if he's going over video, he's doing that work. He's doing a good job with his own team to get a good sense analytically of what's going on. But do they even use that same process for all the other teams?
Right.
If Dave Tippett thinks it's important enough to do it for his own team, are
Yeah.
they doing it for all the other teams? It's a lot of work,
Yeah.
but that's what makes the difference. And I don't think that I'd be surprised if they are, Bruce. I don't think they have that information. Now, I don't know. There's two ways to get analytics. You can have people on your own staff, and you need lots of those people. You need a number of people at least, but you can also hire outside companies. There's a number who do this kind of work. Do they even hire them? Do they have that kind of information available or not? I don't know. I can't answer that question. So I'd be surprised if they put the same level. They know that Tippett knows as a coach he needs that work to be done to understand his team, and that's why he's done it. That's why he's done it for 20 years now. He said.
Mm-hmm.
Are they doing it on the rest of the league before they invest millions and millions of dollars in players? And if they're not, that is utter incompetence. And I'm worried about it as well, Bruce. I'm not confident that they're doing that kind of work that needs to be done.
And even on a focal point, like it's unrealistic to expect them to know that about every player on every team. But if you're looking for a guy in a trade, or if it's October 7th and Kyle Turris has just been bought out and he's going on the market in 36 hours, uh, a, a service like Instat that you and I had, where you can look at shift by shift of the player X number of games, you could actually watch that player and say, well, what did he do at this end? What did he do at that end? How was he involved in the play? What kind of mistakes did he make that caused grief? And if you look at 20 or 30 games of the guy, you're probably going to have, video evidence. And then you also have the numerical statistical evidence. And you need to do that kind of stuff. This is how the NHL works these days. And the teams that have strong analytical departments are going places. Tampa Bay, they don't take a back seat to anyone. Guess what? They got a good team.
And we don't even know, like the fact is, like when people say analytics, they think of the way they understand them, looking at, on ice analytics, Corsi, Fenwick and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
The best NHL teams, we don't know what they're doing. We can assume they are doing all kinds of things that are very, first of all, they're secret, they're private because they give them a competitive edge and we have no idea. Right. My hunch is they're definitely drilling down into the individual actions of individual players on ice. They're not going on ice numbers, maybe some information that they use, but they are definitely looking at the individual actions of players, how they react in all kinds of different situations, and getting very granular, rich data on that kind of thing, way beyond what you and I do. We just skim the surface. I think that they're doing this for all the teams. They have that kind of rich data, and it helps them make decisions. Do the Oilers? I don't have that kind of confidence that the Oilers do. And they're relying on the scouts, who go to the games and watch the games. They take notes. They take very good notes. Some of them are excellent at what they do. But they need that kind of, they need to have the eye of Sauron on the whole darn league and know what they're doing at every single moment. Although Frodo escaped the eye of Sauron, so maybe that's not the best analogy. But so I have a question there as well, Bruce. If I'm not...
and another value would be, the person who sort of looks at contracts with the 7-year, 7-generation long-term view of what can go right, what could go wrong with contracts. They could save many times their own salary by simply putting the team off of a single bad signing. And obviously you need to get the right person doing that, but this idea, well, if we pay Mikko Koskinen like he's a number one goalie, maybe he'll become a number one goalie.
Because with Turris, for instance, like you could tell within a week, like, whoa, what's going on here? All you have to do is watch, and like, we don't have. It's not our full-time job to go over every player in the NHL, but it is theirs. Anyway, let's do your job better, and I'm not getting more pessimistic as we speak, Bruce. So maybe it's time to Bruce, thanks for talking today.
Lots of grist for your post.
Yeah, it did. I
Yeah.
think help clarify what the direction of it.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.